V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Beini uven b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam, oti le'olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai Asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'inafash V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Amen. L'chaim. Okay, Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay. Plenty of good seats still available. If anybody wants. It's like Rosh Hashanah. No one wants to sit in the front row.
I tried to tell him on stop properly.
Okay. Today's an interesting morning. It's going to be a little bit different today. The minyan will be in the sanctuary and will be led by our adult B'nai Mitzvah class, who is having their adult B'nai Mitzvah. 11 of our adult learners. And in here will be a bar mitzvah. It's a private bar mitzvah, although anyone's welcome to join. And it's semi-private, yeah. It's like you could be a member, but you don't really get your own locker. Yeah. All right. Okay, Torah portion today is a Chazak V'nit Chazek week. We're finishing the book of Leviticus with the double portion of Bahar and Bechukotai, and then next week move into the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers. And so today, Bechukotai is one of the very depressing Torah portions. It lists all the different rebukes that the blessings and curses, but mostly curses, and the rebukes that the Jewish people will receive if they don't follow the mitzvot, which is then repeated again towards the end of Deuteronomy in the Torah portion called Kitavo, although there are some slight differences, and when we get to those Torah portions, what we usually do is compare the two differences to see what's different between the rebukes of Bechukotai and the rebukes of Kitavo. But today I want to look more at Bahar, and Bahar begins, I forgot, darn it. Well, I still have another chance tonight. So, I have a few, God, I can't believe I forgot. I waited all year for it. So the Torah portion is Bahar, and I have a few ties by the designer Ike Behar. And I try to always wear a Bahar tie on Bahar, and I wait all year. And I forgot this morning. But I have a bar mitzvah later this evening. I have another shot. So all is not lost. Although by this evening, technically it'll be in Bamidbar. So But I'll try to get dressed before the sun goes down, and I'll still fulfill the mitzvah. So I'll still, I'll still fulfill the mitzvah. For
His is bagels.
yeah, but it's the same, Okay. I usually call Bob Behar this week too and wish him a good Shabbos. All right. So Bahar it's a Jewish name, and it's named after this week's Torah portion. Ba means on, can mean in, but here it means on, and Har means mountain, like Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. And so that's the name of the Torah portion. And the first thing we learn about in Bahar is Shemitah. Now, does anyone / everyone, because this is a learned group, but do we know what Shemitah and Yovel are? How many know what Shemitah and Yovel? How about if I told you the 7th agricultural year and the Jubilee year? Does that help? Yeah. Okay, so the 7th agricultural year in the Torah is that every 7 years you have to let the land go fallow, which is a word that adults know and 7th graders do not. No, I've been teaching it. Fallow, what? Now, I don't know if any of you are farmers. Stuart Gottlieb's not here. He usually is my agricultural guy. But even to this day, I think farmers tell you that that's something that you have to do. You leave the land grow for a certain amount of time, and then otherwise you kill the land or so forth. Now, the question is, why every 7 years? And as a Torah student, you say, wow, 7, that sounds familiar. Wow, rest on the 7th day, that sounds familiar. Now this, though, is not the 7th day, it's the 7th year. But you're not really going to leave your land grow fallow 1 day a week and then go back to farming as soon as Shabbos is over and expect that that there's going to be any real change. You're not allowed to farm on Shabbat anyway. But so it's not, whereas we have a Shabbat every week, the land only has a Shabbat. But remember, the word Shabbat just means rest, right? But the land has its Shabbat every 7 years. And then there's the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year, where we see in this week's Torah portion, in chapter 25, there's a verse that is most famously found in America on the Liberty Bell. I think we mentioned this last year or the year before. Always mention it. So if you're ever in Philadelphia and you go to see the Liberty Bell, you can see on it, there's written a verse from Leviticus, which is kind of cool. So that verse talks about freedom and proclaiming freedom throughout the land. And so we can ask the question, well, what does freedom throughout the land have to do with the land going fallow in the 50th year, or what exactly is the difference between Shemitah and Yovel? And so one of the things that goes along with Shemitah and Yovel, meaning the agricultural leaving the land to rest, is also a reset of some economic ideas. One is that in the 50th year, all land holdings go back to their original owners. And the other is slaves. Oh, debts too, but also slaves. Slaves go free, unless they don't want to. But in the 50th year, they have to, even if they don't want to. Now, a lot of this is not that clearly explained in the Torah, and so you have to go to the Talmud to get all of the details. We don't need to do that for now, but if you were really interested in that, then you would go to the end of chapter 7 of Sanhedrin, like on page 82, 83, and there it talks about all this stuff. Okay. Whoa. Okay, so I want to start today dealing with Yovel and Shemitah. I don't know why I'm getting that weird noise. Yeah. Okay. Let's, do you hear that? Is this on?
Yeah.
That's off?
It's off.
I think that's on. Test 1, 2. That made it worse. The other way. Had to go the other way. If I put it in my ear, it works. Nobody can hear me, but it works. All right. All right, let's see what we can do. Chapter 25, verse 18. Wait, that's not right. Yeah, it is. Chapter 25, verse 18. I know it's a weird verse, but it's second triennial cycle, so we're in the middle. Okay. Chapter 25, verse 18. John? Mm. Scholars love that kind of stuff, where they can say, well, we're not the only people who are doing this. This was an idea. So, okay. Nobody here. Would you mind? Sorry. All right, thanks. You have verse 18? You have the stone, so that's his translation may be a little bit different because it's better. But don't worry, we're working on a new one.
You shall perform my decrees. Is it on?
Yeah, uh-huh.
You shall perform my decrees and observe my ordinances and perform them. Then you shall dwell securely on the land. The land will give its fruit, and you will eat your fill. You will dwell securely upon it. If you will say, what will we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we will not sow and not gather in our crops. I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. You will sow in the 8th year, but you will eat from the old crop. Until the 9th year, until the arrival of its crop, you will eat the old.
Okay, so does this remind you of anything? Extra food?
Joseph.
So Joseph said save for 7 years, right? But does it remind you of anything else? Very good. The manna, or manna in Hebrew, the manna you weren't allowed to collect on Shabbat. So the day before, you took a double portion. That's why we have 2 challahs on Shabbos, right? Lechem Mishneh, the two different challahs, to represent the double portion of manna. But what you see now here is the relationship of the manna to Shabbat. And here, the relationship to the harvest, to the Shemitah year, meaning also to Shabbat. So when I say Shabbat today, I don't really mean the Sabbath as we know it, 24 hours from Friday night to Saturday night. When I say Shabbat, I mean a period of cessation. And so the Omer to the Jews wandering in the wilderness, the double portion to Shabbat is similar here to collecting. Now the difference here is though it takes 3 years. You only need food for Shabbat. That's only 1 day. So you need a double portion. Here you need a triple portion. Because in the 6th year, you need to grow food for the 6th year. You need to grow food for the 7th year when you're not allowed to harvest. And you need to grow food for a majority of the 8th year, because when you start planting again, it's going to take a while for that food to grow. So that's why it says here in verse 21, in that 6th year, you're going to have a crop that's sufficient for 3 years. By the way, this is very good, because even if you're of little faith, your crop is going to grow so much that you don't have to worry, is it going to come or not? It's there, right? So what could happen though is you could say in the 6th year, yeah, you see why my crop is growing more this year than last year? Because I'm a better farmer than I used to be. Look how amazing I am. And I'm just going to grow it and eat it all, and next year I'm going to do it again. Next year nothing's going to grow. So you have to recognize that the extra food that's coming in the 6th year is not because you're a wonderful farmer, it's a gift from God. Chas v'shalom. Okay, I can repeat the question. Okay, or just pass the mic. Keep forgetting to get you your own. Yeah, I keep forgetting. It's BYOM. It's on. It's not for us. It's for the people at home. Sure. Right. But what my point is that you don't have to have that much faith because it's proven to you before it happens. You already have the food. That it's going to come back. That's true. That's true. Yeah, so there's a degree of faith, but seeing is believing, and the food's coming in triple in the 6th year. That's a good thing. Okay, let's keep going. That's a minor point. Where do we get to? 23?
Okay. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, for you are sojourners and residents with me. In the entire land of your ancestral heritage, you shall provide redemption for the land.
Yeah, I heard a rabbi speaking about this week, and he was saying, I don't know if this is true or not, but he was saying something about Israeli law, that you can only own a piece of land for so long. And then it reverts back to the state, then you can buy it back, and it's a loophole. But the idea is that nobody's allowed to own the land of Israel permanently, because the land belongs to God. I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard a rabbi comment on it. Is it? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, there's some sort of, it's very interesting. That's their separation of church and state. They separate you from your land. Right? Okay. Okay, let's keep going, please.
If your brother becomes impoverished and sells part of his ancestral heritage, his redeemer who is closest to him shall come and redeem his brother's sale. If a man will have no redeemer, but his means suffice, and he acquires enough for his redemption, then he shall reckon the years of his sale and return the remainder to the man to whom he had sold it, and he shall return to his ancestral heritage.
Okay, so you see these laws here so that no one should end up buying the whole block. And no one should end up, because even if you do, you're going to have to get in the 50th year, the Yovel year, which is, Yovel is this word for Jubilee. You're going to have to give everything reverts back to the original owner. Who are the original owners? The people the family that land was assigned to when Joshua came into the land of Israel. Okay, now, why would anyone sell their land in the first place? And what Rashi says here, I didn't bring you this Rashi, but what Rashi says on verse 25 is, oh, actually, you know what I did? I did bring it. Let's take this is a very important verse, verse 25. John, would you mind reading the Rashi there? Thou shalt relieve him.
Rashi on Leviticus 25:25. Thou shalt relieve him. Do not leave him by himself so that he comes down in the world until he finally falls altogether, when it will be difficult to give him a lift, but uphold him from the very moment of the failure of his means. To what may this, the differences between whether you assist him at once or whether you wait with your help until he has come down in the world, be compared? To the excessive load on the back of an ass. So long as it is still on the ass's back, one person is enough to take hold of the load and keep it, the ass, up. As soon as it has fallen on the ground, not even 5 persons are able to set it on its legs.
Okay, so the idea is that, by the way, the Gemara adds something very fascinating here. That the reason someone goes into poverty is because of their sins. That they were doing because of really financial sins. So for example, you're supposed to tithe. But if you didn't tithe, or if you used your tithing in the wrong way. So for example, let's say you did tithe. All tithing means is that you set it aside. You take 10% and you set it aside. That's the act of tithing. Then offering it is making the offering. In other words, there's 2 parts of the process. Separating 1/10 that belongs to God, then bringing it for your sacrifice. In Jerusalem, once the temple was built, otherwise wherever they were doing it. So let's say you set your 10% aside, and then said, you know what? I got 10% over here that looks a little worse. I'm going to go back and take this 10% back, and all I have to do is give 10%. It could be any 10%. I like this 10% better. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to take this 10% and offer that to God. Can't do that. Once you've already separated, you separate. So if you did there's a million different laws like that. And there are different types of tithing. Now, tithing is a misleading word because in Hebrew the word is meiser. Meiser sounds Yiddish. It's actually Hebrew. But if you change the vowels around, it would sound more like ma'aser. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, eser, meiser. An eser is 1/10. So one time I was playing golf when I was living in Fort Myers with a Christian guy. I don't, on the golf course, I'll play with any. It was an interfaith event.
Interfaith experience.
No, actually, before I lived in Miami, I knew people who weren't Jewish. But here, my whole world is, So we were playing golf, and he said to me, "You're not going to believe the nerve of my pastor." Try me. He said, "My pastor said that tithing means I need to give 10% to the church." And he said that biblically the word tithing, and he came up with this random number, 1/10. So I said, "Have you ever looked at it in Hebrew?" No. He said, "What's the word in Hebrew?" Meiser. He said, "Yeah, what does that mean? Contribution?" I said, "No, it means 1/10. He could not believe it. I mean, he could not believe it. It was so annoying. All right. Every week, 50, 48 weeks a year, the issue with the sound is different every time. Every time it's something, okay, so, yeah. It's a good question. It's 1/10 of everything that you have. The laws for this are also in Sanhedrin, and it's extremely confusing. Extremely confusing. Because it talks about what part of your fields you have to count, and which section is part of your field, but what if you have a neighbor, and what if a tree falls in two different? It's extremely confusing. But it refers to 1/10 of everything that you have. So it's gross.
Percentage of assets as opposed to a percentage.
Yeah, because you're not dealing, it's not, let's say you have a whole field of, okay. No. That's a very interesting question. The Gemara talks about that in great detail. How do you know where the corners are, too? And gosh, I studied all of it. Now I feel like I don't remember any of it. It's really complicated. Well, everything in the Talmud is really complicated. But the idea is that, let's say you have a farm and you take all your apples. Doesn't mean you're going to sell them all. So it's not like you say, okay, here's what I sold. I sold $100,000 worth of apples, so I have to give $10,000 to. That's not how it works. What you do is you count how many apples you have, and then you say, all right, I have 100,000 apples. I have to give 10,000 apples to. Right, it works like that.
Norman says he can't hear you.
Nobody can.
So I told him to tell them read lips.
Tell them we're having some audio difficulties, but hopefully that'll help. Norman, can you hear me? Text Bobby if you can hear me. Okay.
Nothing yet. I don't think it goes beyond the Mississippi.
I feel like Darth Vader. May have put this over. Okay, let's just try this. Norman, I hope you can hear me. We're all thinking about you guys. Hope you're doing well. Okay, let's keep going with the Rashi. I'll just read it quickly. It says, the resident alien. Okay, so even though he be a stranger or a sojourner, and what is this term resident alien that's mentioned in verse 25? One who's undertaken not to worship idols, i.e., one who has been converted to the fundamental tenet of Judaism, but eats carrion, does not care for the other commandments of the Torah. So, in other words, there's three types of people that could be living in Israel. There's the Jew, who's all the mitzvot are incumbent upon him. There's the non-Jew, who, if they worship idols, you can kick out. And then there's the ger toshav, which means the resident alien. And that is someone who is not Jewish, but agrees to follow the 7 Noahide laws. And if you're a non-Jewish slave, you have to follow those. So that's what we're talking about. So it is possible then that if you have a Jew who becomes a slave to one of those types of people, a non-Jew or a ger toshav, a resident alien, you have to redeem them right away. If someone's a slave to a Jew, you don't have to redeem them right away because you can be certain that the Jew who owns them is going to allow them to follow all of the mitzvahs. So you don't have to worry that they're going to be forced to not follow the mitzvahs or worship idols or whatever. Now, okay, so let's keep going. Verse, where do I want to go? Just want to skip around a little bit. Hang on. Why aren't I finding the verse? Oh, okay, it's because I'm going forward. I should have gone backward. I wanted to start and then come backward. If you just look, now, how do you know when it's the Yovel year? How do you, what happens? So, if you come back with me to verse 9, now this is going to get interesting. So far it's been pretty boring, but now it's going to get interesting. But sometimes you need the background before you can get into the good stuff. All right. Anyone have verse 9? Joe, would you mind with that mic? With her mic? Yeah, Eileen's mic. Okay, so, and that's actually, verse 10 is the verse that's on the Liberty Bell. You shall sanctify the 50th year, and you shall proclaim, sounds nice, right? Very American. You shall proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It's a Yovel year for you. Okay, very nice verse. And the word in Hebrew for freedom, which is an interesting word, is dror, which is a very important word. Now, it sounds like door, right, generation, but it's not. There's an R after the D. Dror, D-R-O-R. We have a member of our temple named Dror, right? Dror, that's Drora, is the female version of it. But Dror, what's his last name? Zadok, right. Very Hebrew name. In Hebrew, Dror Zadok, Chagit's dad. Okay. Now, did you see what happened there? On what day do we sound the shofar? What day is the Yovel? Yom Kippur. Isn't that, so the rabbis asked the question, well, wait a minute. If it's a day when you sound the shofar, and it's around the high holy days, and it's getting to the point where we're turning over to the 50th year, wouldn't that be Rosh Hashanah? Doesn't the 50th year start on Rosh Hashanah? Isn't Rosh Hashanah more of a shofar holiday? Why do we blow the shofar? Why do we wait 10 days till Yom Kippur? So that's the question that they ask. So Maimonides, the Rambam in Hilchot Shemitah, gives the answer. So, Eileen, would you mind reading number 10? It is a positive commandment. that's just the first law that Maimonides is summarizing, telling us what we do. But now in verse 14, in Halacha 14, which means law 14, is going to tell us, well, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? What's going on here? Okay, would you mind reading that one, number 14? Okay, so did you see the two-part process? You see the two-part process? So, here we go again. On Rosh Hashanah, you're free. But, and you're free. You're eating, you're drinking, you're rejoicing, you get a new hat, right? But the shofar that really frees you hasn't sounded yet. So, what happens? Look what he says in 14. This is so weird. So from Rosh Hashanah for Yom Kippur, from the 1st of Tishrei to the 10th of Tishrei, servants would not be released to their homes, but they don't have to work for their masters. They still live in the home of whoever, they still live in the home of their masters, but the master's not allowed to use them as slaves. In fact, the master has to throw them a party for 10 days. Okay? That's what that is. Then on Yom Kippur, they're free to finally go home. So what Maimonides, he's not saying why. That's not the point of the Mishnah Torah. The point of the Mishnah Torah is just to tell you what to do. If you want to know why, you have to look in the Gemara. But you didn't want to look in the Gemara, and you never studied the Gemara, so Maimonides wrote the Mishnah Torah to just tell you what to do. Okay. So all I'm saying now is the Torah tells us that the Jubilee year is on the 10th day. Maimonides says, well, wait a minute, why not the first day? Why not Rosh Hashanah? And then he says, because it's a two-part process. The first part is that you stay in the, you're freed on the first day, but you still have to stay there and party. Then on the 10th day, they blow the shofar. Now notice, you eat, drink, and celebrate those first 9 days, but then Yom Kippur, which we know that that's exactly what you don't do. Okay, so, and then on the 10th day, you go free. So what Maimonides, we didn't say why yet. We're going to get to that. But what we've said so far is that it's a 10-day process with the beginning, Rosh Hashanah, meaning you don't have to work as a slave anymore, but you still have to stay there, and on the 10th you go free. We didn't say why yet, we've just said what happens. No. It didn't start over. You go back to, we were on the same cycle. So you could do the math. I mean, we're in 5785. So I guess you got another 15 years or so. It was Shemitah year a few years ago. One of the most amazing things about going to Israel, if it's a Shemitah year, is because around Ben Gurion there's a lot of farms. And so you get off the plane, you get your bags, you go to your bus, you drive to your hotel, and you're going to pass farms that say Kan Shomrim Shemitah. There's signs everywhere. It says here these farms are observing Shemitah, and all of a sudden you realize you're in a biblical land. Very, very powerful thing. I think so. I think so. I'm not 100%. You have to Google it. I'm not 100% sure, and I'm also terrible at math. But sounds right. Two things I'm terrible at: farming and math. Okay, now, one thing you learn from Maimonides is that those 9 days involve eating, drinking, celebrating, and then on the 10th day, you don't do that, and you fast. And then when that fasting is over, you go free. Which sounds a little bit to us like the High Holy Days. Right? We have our 9 days, and you can eat whatever you want. You're supposed to be repenting. But then on the 10th day, you stop eating, drinking, etc. But on the 10th day, when it's over, you go free. Right? Because you've been forgiven from all your sins. And what do we do at the end of Yom Kippur when we go free from all our sins? Before that, sound the shofar. Kia Gedola, right? That's why. That's why we have the tekiah at the end of Yom Kippur. Because we're going free from all of our sins. And when you go free, it's appropriate to blow the shofar, which is the same reason why they do it here in the Yovel year. See that? Pretty cool, right?
What happens to the slave who doesn't want to leave?
You do it. You do it on Yom Kippur.
Slave that doesn't want to leave the master.
Oh, so you get your ear pierced and you stay. Yeah. But in the 50th year, you go free. Even the slave who wants to stay forever in the 50th year, yeah, it's called the...
Wasn't that law devised for the indentured servant rather than the slave?
It's very complicated. It's in the beginning of in the Talmud in Kedushin, talks about it. The first few pages of Kedushin talk about the different rules and when you go out and so forth. There are a lot of different reasons. It's very complicated. But it's good stuff. Okay, now, since Maimonides referred to this eating and drinking period, I want to show you where he gets this idea from in the Talmud. So if you look at the bottom of the sheet, it says Bavli Brachot, meaning the Talmud of Brachot, 17a. It says this: Rav was wont to say. I mean, he would, anytime you ran into him, he would say this. He couldn't stop saying this. God knows how often. He wouldn't shut up about it. All right. The world to come is not like this world. In the world to come, there's no eating, no drinking, no procreation, no business negotiations, no jealousy, no hatred, and no competition. In other words, from this description, we understand what Yom Kippur is supposed to be like. Yom Kippur, that's why we wear white. Because we want to be like the angels. The angels don't live here, they live in heaven. And they live in a place where there's no eating, there's no drinking. So, on Tisha B'Av, we don't eat because we're like punishing ourselves, because it's so sad and we're in mourning. On Yom Kippur, that we don't eat for a different reason. And the reason we don't eat is because we want to feel spiritual, as if we're with God in heaven, and eating is something you don't do there, and that would distract you. Now, I know what you're thinking. I could pray a lot better if I had a big sandwich right about now. Right, okay, but that's not the idea. So rather, the righteous sit with... Now, look what he says here. Because you asked the question, what is Maimonides talking about with these crowns on the head? So what it says is, rather, the righteous sit with their crowns upon their heads, enjoying the splendor of the divine presence, as it is stated, and they beheld God, and they ate and drank. And by the way, at Mount Sinai, all the Jews had crowns on their heads. And later on, when they committed their sins, God took them away. But the yarmulke, in part, is supposed to be a symbol of the crowns that were put on our heads at Mount Sinai. That we were all like kings because we knew what it was like to be with God. Now, this is really one of the clearest definitions in the Talmud of what it's like in heaven. We don't know what it's like in heaven. All we know is that it's a soulful experience and our bodies don't go. So if your body doesn't go, there's no eating, there's no drinking, there's no procreating, there's no getting sick, there's no hip, there's no sciatica, that's my own issue. But there's just radiating in God's presence radiating onto you, and it's this feeling of perfection. Okay, now let's get into, now that we have let's say it this way. What then is the Jubilee year? What's the point of the Jubilee year? Well, we've just compared the Jubilee year to Yom Kippur. How did we do that?
Well, the Torah tells us that the Jubilee year begins on Yom Kippur. But then we ask why? Well, what do they have in common? They have in common the shofar. Right? We blow the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. We blow the shofar to signify that we're in the 50th Yovel year. That also represents, another similarity is freedom. All the slaves go free, everything resets, everything that got out of whack financially, economically, in terms of social justice. This is a big thing for social justice people, which that's what's being said here. That's what freedom throughout the land for all the inhabitants is talking about. But that's only part of it. If you stop at the social justice, you miss I could drop the mic and say, okay, there's your social action. Let's go do mitzvah day, Shabbat Shalom. But there's more to it. So what's the added layer? There's something about what happens to us at the end of Yom Kippur, going free spiritually, being released from the burdens of all of our sins and the mistakes that we made, and something going on here with Yovel. Now, the other thing we know is that there's this cycle that, right, how often is the Shemitah? Every 7 years. And how often is the Yovel? Every 50 years. Why? Okay, so before I answer that question, I just want to show you a couple of other things in the Tanakh. So there's a story about Joshua. If you look in the book of Joshua, chapter 6, verse 2, which is here on the sheet. Anyone know what Joshua's last name is? It's a different guy. You know, Yehoshua ben Nun. Anyone ever heard of that? This was my Haftorah portion for my bar mitzvah. So I knew his name pretty well. Vaishlach Yehoshua ben Nun min hashiti. I still know my bar mitzvah Torah portion by heart. Min hashiti. You want to? No, all right. But it starts off, Vaishlach Yehoshua ben Nun, and Joshua the son of Nun sent out. It's the story of the spies. Okay, so here's what it says. God said to Joshua, see, I will deliver Jericho into your hands, its kings and its warriors. So you know the story that Joshua goes in? How did he get the walls to come crumbling down? With the shofar. Okay, so there's something here in this story of Joshua conquering the land of Israel, the Jews returning to the land of Israel. Now, most of the Jews have never been there before, except maybe on an earlier birthright trip or something, but this is the land of their ancestors, right? This is the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, and now they're coming back after 210 years of slavery and 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and so forth. Actually, it's been 400 years total since Jacob first left, but for many years, they weren't slaves for a large part, for the first part of that. But here's what it says. Let all your troops march around the city and complete one circuit on that day. Do this 6 days, with 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns preceding the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. And when a long blast is sounded on the horn, as soon as you hear that sound of the horn, all the troops shall give a mighty shout. Thereupon a city wall will collapse, and the troops shall advance every man straight ahead. Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said to them, take the Ark of the Covenant and let 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns precede the Ark of God. Now this story of the Jews coming in and conquering the land of Israel has a lot to do with our story of Yovel. What do we have in common? They blew the shofars to get the walls to come down, so we have the shofar. And do you notice the 7s, the Shemitahs? Look at verse 4. 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns on the 7th day 7 times. So, what if they would have said, listen, Joshua, we looked around. Could only find 6 horns. Abort. It's not going to work. It had to be 7. Now, what don't we have about Yovel? What's Yovel? What number? 50. We don't have 50 here, right? You know what gematria is? So, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. That's why Chai is Right, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet. Chet is 8. Tet, Yud. Yud is 10. 10 plus 8, if you can work that out, 18. Okay, so how does it work? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What's the next letter after Yud? Kaf. What's Kaf? 20. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 200, 300, 400. That's it. That's from the first. So if I say Kaf is 20, Lamed is, I'm going in order. Mem is, Nun is Joshua's last name, which stands for 50. That's the 50. His last name wasn't Nun. I mean, it might have been Nun, but it probably wasn't. It means that Joshua was the son of 50. Well, what's 50? 50 is the Yovel year. What's 50? 50 is the year that we blow the shofar. Well, what's the shofar? That's the year that the Jews come back to Israel. So who was Joshua? Joshua is the guy who took over after Moses died and brought the Jews back to the land of Israel. So what's 50? The 50 in his name represents, I'm the guy who brought the Jews back home to freedom. And that's why we blew the shofar there. That's why the shofar, and that's why everything has to be 7. Now, I don't want to give this away too early, but we're getting there. Why 7 and 50? Who cares? I don't know if you remember this. And I never really, to be honest, I never really put this together myself. But we're talking about 7, 7, 7s, and then you get to 50. Big deal. Well, do you remember last week in Amor, we started talking about counting the Omer? Well, what's Omer? Omer is 7 weeks of 7 days, 49 days. And what happens on the 50th day? You get the Torah. That's freedom. Now, I don't know what people were doing in the ancient Near East with regard to farming and all on the 7th year and letting their land go fallow, but the Jewish system is based on what it means to be a free person. And what does it mean to be a free person? It means to start in Egypt on the first day of the Omer and to count 7 weeks of 7 days to the 49th day. And then on the 50th day, you get the Torah, that's Jubilee. So the whole Shemitah and Yovel is based on the concept of going free from Egypt and getting to Mount Sinai, which is what we call counting the Omer. Today's day 41. Tonight will be 42. Right? We'll be 6 weeks in. Do you see that connection? It's incredible, isn't it? Okay. Now, just a couple verses from Exodus. I'll try to wrap this up and make it make sense. So in Exodus it says, the first time we saw Omer, I kind of mentioned this before, but it said, this is what God commanded. Each household shall gather as much as it requires to eat. An Omer to a person for as many of you as there are. Each household shall fetch according to those in its tent. So we're counting the Omer now, but this is the verse I just showed you is the first time the Torah mentions what is an Omer. So we're counting the Omer, but what is Omer? Omer referred to originally referred to the quantity of food, of manna that you scooped up on any given day. That was an Omer, originally. Later on it became sheaves that you waved. But originally it referred to an Omer is a measurement of the amount of manna that it took to survive on one day. And then in verse 29 it says, who having given... I didn't type in, it says, God, who have given you the Sabbath, therefore gives you 2 days of food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain in place. Let no one leave the vicinity on the 7th day. And so what that's saying is, you see later on, this is foreshadowing that later on, there was going to be something having to do with resting of your land on the 7th year. This is a foreshadowing of that. So I just wanted to show you those couple of verses. Now, the Nachmanides brings in Kabbalah. Because anytime you hear all these numbers, 7, 49, 50, there's got to be Kabbalistic stuff going on. Now, Nachmanides would just give you a hint. He wouldn't, and maybe he had two purposes. To the real scholar, he'd give you a hint and tell you where to look in the Kabbalah so you could go and really learn it. And to the non-scholar, he'd say, here's all you need. You'll be fine. All right. So he says, and by the way of truth, which when he says this in Hebrew, it's al derech ha'emet, which is code for I'm about to give you Kabbalah. Nachmanides is very Kabbalistic. The mystic teachings of the Kabbalah, the term dror, liberty, is related to the expression dor, a generation. Right? He sees a connection there. Passeth away, vador, and a generation cometh. Similarly, Yovel means that everyone will return to the Yovel source when his roots are. And this shall be unto you until that time. So what he's saying from the Kabbalistic explanation of dror is that if you really want to understand dror, you have to recognize, and this is the secret, that dror is connected to the word door. And dror means liberty, and dor means generation. And until you get to the next generation, you're not going to have liberty. Why? Because there was the generation of the wilderness who didn't get it. But the next generation would go into the land. So what did the next generation do that the first generation didn't in the wilderness? They returned to the source of where Jewish people are supposed to be. Right? To the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The land that God showed Abraham. Right? The land of Israel. They returned there. And what Nachmanides is saying is, for a Jewish person, your roots are Israel. That's where you're supposed to be. If you're not there, something's wrong. Okay, clear so far? Okay, so Rabbeinu Bachya lived after Nachmanides, and he made a profession saying, I know you didn't understand Nachmanides, so I'll explain it for you. Right? So, if one of you wants to, you could distill these classes and then go stand on like in the basketball court to our members who don't come in here but do go there and explain it to them in layman's terms, you could be the Rabbeinu Bachya of our generation. You don't have to, though. It's just a joke. All right, so I don't know. You can read it. We don't necessarily need to get into it. But I do, because we're running out of time. But I just want to show you something from Ruth. Now, when we get to, by the way, when we were building the hub, I went to the Safra Center in New York with a couple of our members, and we went to look to see, well, how do they do what they do? Because we were trying to learn how to build our thing, and we went to a bunch of other places. So I met with the executive director, and they had a pool and a shul, which is nice. And it was really like a big Jewish community center, but it also had a synagogue. It was a really neat place, and we wanted to learn some lessons from that. So the executive director said to me, my job is to get the people who daven to swim a little more, and the people who swim to daven a little more. I thought it was yeah, sure. I liked his philosophy. Okay, so there are a lot of connections between Ruth, the Omer, and Shavuot, right? We read Ruth on Shavuot, right? Now, one of the reasons we read it is because Ruth wasn't the first person to convert in the Tanakh, but she was the first person to have a book about her converting in the Tanakh. Right? There are plenty of people converted before her, but she was the first one to have a whole book about her. And it's an agricultural story. It's a story of redemption. And it's a story of freedom. It's also a story of returning roots of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And it's also a story about fixing a historical wrong. Because what happened was there were these brothers who died, and Machlon and, what's the other guy's name? Machlon and Ilion or something like that. Blanking on the other brother's name. But so here's what happens. Look at Ruth 4:10, which there's only 4 books of Ruth. This is towards the end. Machlon and Kilion. By the way, I don't know that those were their names, because Machlon means illness and Kilion means extinction. So I don't think their parents named them, I think you guys are going to die early, so I'm going to call, I don't think those were really their names, but the names hint at the role that they play in the Tanakh. So I'm also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon, the sickly one. You know, it's not a name that people usually choose. As my wife, right, comes from the word chole, right, cholim, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his state. In other words, her husband died, so we want her to have a husband so that his name will continue. That's called fixing a historical problem. The name of the deceased may not disappear from amongst his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witness today. And so they do get married. And then the end of Ruth, the Moabite who converts, there's a genealogy. And it lists this person begot this person, and this person begot this person, and we don't care about any of them. But when you get to the end of Ruth, there's an interesting name that's the very last one. Odbed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David, who is the grandson of Ruth the Moabite. Okay. So let me just give you one last verse from Isaiah, and then we'll tie it together. So it says in Isaiah, and in that day, a great ram's horn shall be sounded, and the strayed who are in the land of Assyria, and the expelled who are in the land of Egypt shall come and worship God on the holy mount in Jerusalem. So what you see there is, in Isaiah, that when the Jews return to Israel, there'll be a great shofar that sounds. And the story of Ruth is the story of correcting this historical wrong, that this guy's name's going to be drowned out. And not only is his name not drowned out, it becomes David. And who's David? David is the one who begins the line of the Mashiach, right? Mashiach ben David, right? The one who brings the Jewish people back to Israel. So I think in the final analysis, we started reading this story about every 7 years you let the land go fallow. And every 50 years everyone goes free. And we could say, okay, it's a story of social justice, that the Torah didn't want anyone to be too rich or too powerful or anyone to be a slave for too long, and everyone gets a reset. Okay, and it's a great social action, social justice message. But then I said, well, wait a minute. Didn't we just read last Torah portion that we count 7 years? We count 7 weeks 7 times, which becomes 49. And then in the 50th year, we get to Mount Sinai and get the Torah, and we're totally united with God, and the Jewish people are completely united. Right? The Torah says, Vayichan Am. The nation was encamped. They were all in one camp. You know how hard it is to get all the Jews in the world to be together in one camp and agree on anything? I don't know if it's happened since. Right? So we had 49 days of traveling, of counting, and those 49 days, like we just saw here, of going and getting from Egypt to Mount Sinai, the 49 days had something to do with the Omer. What did they have to do with the Omer? Well, that's what they were eating, the manna. And now we do it every year since, to remember how they counted. In other words, there's this agricultural aspect to the freedom. But the agricultural aspect to the freedom means they got their food from God. They relied on God. And in the same way that they relied on God for the food to fall from the heavens, we today rely on God for the food to come out from the land, but we have to participate in it. The way that they participated in it was not gathering the Omer on Shabbat. The way that we participated in it is by leaving the land grow fallow in the 7th year. So we see that the counting of the Omer in last week's Torah portion and the Shemitah and the Yovel year of this week's Torah portion mirror each other in all of the same themes. But then there's more. That in the 50th year, we blow that shofar. And when we blow that shofar, we blow it on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day where we fix everything that's wrong. Everything that we did wrong, everything that doesn't fit, everything that is not as it was supposed to be, on Yom Kippur we fix. And when we do that, we get the crowns back on our head. Right? They lost the crown with the golden calf. We get it back on our head on Yom Kippur. And that's what we have. And there's Kabbalistic numbers and all that stuff. And then we see, but then there's one more final piece. When Joshua came into the land of Israel with 50 and 7 and the shofar, it's similar to Ruth, who restored the line of King David to the land of Israel and the future kingship of the Jewish people. And so, just as all of this is about freedom and people going free, what it's really about is fixing historical wrongs, things that shouldn't have been. That's why we blow the shofar that's why Joshua had to destroy the walls of Jericho with the shofar. Couldn't have been any other way. It had to be the shofar. Because what was the historical wrong that he was fixing? And this is the point of the whole story, and Isaiah says it very clearly. The historical wrong was the Jewish people were removed from the land of Israel. And all of this, that's what the Kabbalah is bringing, what the Yovel does is bring everything back to its source. That's what the shofar represents. Bringing everything back to its door, to its source. And the Jewish people outside the land of Israel doesn't fit. It's not what it was supposed to be. It's a historical wrong. So bringing back the Jewish people to the land of Israel, that's the drawer. If we want to put it on the Liberty Bell, that's just fine. But it was really meant for a different land. Although if we can't be there, we might as well be here. But that's what all of this is about. The 50th year, the Jubilee year, is about fixing the historical wrongs. We do it on our own day. We do it in our own lives on Yom Kippur. But the Yovel had to be on Yom Kippur because that's what that day represents. And resetting the Jewish people in the land of Israel is fixing the ultimate historical wrong. Okay. All right. Shabbat Shalom. We join together. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek.